Hello and welcome to Strip Panel Naked. I'm Hass and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. Comedy is a very hard thing to do in any medium. Dying is easy, comedy is hard. In comics, this is extrapolated, I think. A lot of what we associate with comedy, particularly physical comedy, is near impossible to achieve in the same way. And though movement is created and managed in comics, it's hard to pull off the same physical comedy you might associate with, say, Buster Keaton or someone of that ilk. So typically you'll find comedy that rests mostly on verbal, through character dialogue or by non sequiturs. Showing one thing, then cutting to another unexpected image, creates humour by essentially jarring your brain and thought process. Comics as a medium rely heavily on the images being placed next to each other having sequential meaning. So when you break that, you as a reader often are not expecting the sudden change, particularly if you don't draw attention to it in the previous panel by having a leading caption or something similar. So by creating that juxtaposition, you can build comedy and comedic moments. There's two ways in particular, either by repeating a similar image with a slight change or by giving a completely new action. And I'm going to use 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank by Matthew Rosenberg, Tyler Boss, Claire Dezzutti and Thomas Mauer to take a further look at this. 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank is a comic about, surprisingly, 4 kids, and they are kind of outcasts and they end up running into some trouble with 4 thugs, but it's fun and utilises this juxtaposition technique during the first issue in a number of ways. So the first example, here the juxtaposition takes place within a single panel. We have the 4 titular kids presented, each saying the same thing. Ice cream, with a smile on their face, looking towards the reader. Then we reach Berger, who has his head down and a different bubble. I'm allergic to ice cream. The reason the panel works is it sets up an expectation and then breaks it, essentially that kind of non sequitur we talked about earlier. Our mind expects a 4th ice cream, but instead it gives us that. And that's a kind of simple basis for comedy, right? Set up an expectation for an audience and then dash it. It's also a very simply rendered panel. It's flat, there's very little background detail, and not much to take in for each of the 4 characters. Obvious facial reactions that take practically no time at all to ingest, and the same speech bubble means you move through this panel very quickly. And importantly, you expect to move through the panel very quickly. So here Boss and Rosenberg make you think you'll be skimming straight across a panel, and then they hit you with that final speech bubble. Interestingly, Boss also adds a bit more texture to Berger's shirt here, where in previous panels it's just been that solid mottled burgundy. Now it's got this extra overlaid texture. You see this crop up a few times, but it comes to differentiate Berger, in the same way as his dropped head does. It helps you draw your eye to his final image, and makes it stand apart, which adds that humour of it being different. And if we take a look just below this as well, there's a nice example of changing shot between panels to create the humour in the final 2 frames of this page. This is the father of Paige talking to Berger. So we're establishing that Berger can't eat ice cream with that previous panel, and here Mr. Turner offers a suggestion. Maybe you can just have a little. Then we move to the shot of Berger and see, no, okay, you can watch. The reason the comedy works here is it plays nicely on a setup punchline joke structure between the panels. Setup of, hey, have a little, and notice that Boss has drawn Mr. Turner quite serious, it doesn't look like he's joking. So when we move to the second panel of Berger and his ridiculous reaction, it creates the punchline panel. And the big reason as to why this works in this particular example is the colours. Boss keeps the characters the correct rendering visually, but then changes Berger's punchline panel here to be yellow background. Nowhere in this room they're stood in is there a yellow wallpaper or yellow background. So this has been added in to make this panel stand out. It creates that extra emotive response that backs up Berger's reaction, and again, adds to the funny. So we mentioned changing imagery in a single panel and changing the images panel to panel, so let's look at keeping the images quite similar panel to panel with just a slight change. Here, the 4 kids have just ran towards the front door and opened it to reveal these 4 bad guys. The 2 panels before as they encounter them are where the humour comes from though. So in this case, the image doesn't really change very much at all. There are some minor facial expression changes, but the obvious switch is Berger running towards the camera. Though it seems simple, there's actually quite a lot going on here. We've talked before about that understood movement that occurs between panels in the gutters. We're presented image 1, then image 2, and we acknowledge that in the little white space between the frames, Berger has moved from there to there. So our brain accepts that where he was in movement a panel ago, he's suddenly come to a dead stop. It's reinforced by I call shot and the 2 dashes, indicating that broken surprise, and Thomas Mauer letters that bigger than the next panel's dialogue, holy tits. That creates a sensation of Berger saying it quieter, which is kind of funnier than if he shouted it, and the reaction is the most expressive of the group. The speech bubble is placed in the same position too, so your eyes and brain have very little reading to do across the page, and you essentially just absorb that second panel, rather than having to reread and understand a new image. And again, all that adds to the punch of the joke. And the last thing this panel does, and actually the other 2 examples also did, was place the imagery next to each other. And this is a really key point. In terms of building a beat structure that flows well, the side-by-side panels work really nicely because your eye has less distance to travel, so the punchline lands quicker and more directly. Think of it like a comedian telling a joke. The longer they wait between the setup and punchline, the more your brain has time to think of possible resolutions, and the less out of left field their punchline will be. So you don't want to cause too much of a pause between those beats. And if I take that second panel here and place it below, it has a different rhythm. And the thing with story beats and rhythms is that there's not really a right or wrong approach, but you'll tend to find a way that works more effectively or less effectively. So here, the panel is now below, and I've just reconstructed that top panel to fit alongside it to give you a sense of how else the page could have been designed. So interestingly, the focus now comes to be about these two panels side by side, then running to the door and stopping. Does it still work? Sure, it makes sense chronologically. Does it have the same effect? Well, that's subjective, but for me, it doesn't work as strongly as a rhythm did previously. So by playing around with the panel positioning to affect rhythm and beats, by changing minor things within a panel or a panel-to-panel basis, or by juxtaposing two different images, you can start to build real comedy and humor into these flat 2D drawings. And with that humor comes personality, and 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank has a lot of personality. What you're getting here is just a really nice use of that intrinsic nature of comic books. Place images side by side to create an effect in your brain. And with 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank, the team are utilizing that to keep dropping jokes page after page after page. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying Strip Panel Naked and the video series and want to support us, you can at patreon.com/strippanelnaked, where you'll also get extra analysis and research, reading lists to support each video, and full page and comic breakdowns. If you want to see more analysis on a weekly basis, you can check out my Twitter at HassanOE, where every week I dump a bunch of analysis and thoughts on things I'm reading. Thanks very much.